Hey everyone, welcome back to Fazbear Frights. It's been a while. The third book was just released 1:35 a.m. Well, actually, it wasn't. The preview is out now, and the book is coming in a few days. So I figured, I'm going to get ahead of the trend, and I'm going to read it as soon as possible. So this is part 1 of 1:35 a.m., and obviously, the first story is called 1:35 a.m. "Oh, hooray, Buzzy, Buzzy, Buzzy," sang a loud, tinkling voice. The inane song reached, like a long-handled hook, into Delilah's enjoyable dream and yanked her from the blessed retreat of sleep. "What the?" Delilah muttered, as she sat up in the middle of her rumpled flannel sheets, looking up at the sun, punching through gaps in her blinds. "You make me feel so perky," the singer continued. Delilah threw her pillow at the inadequate wall that separated her apartment from the one next door. The pillow made a satisfied thump when it hit a framed poster depicting a serene, beachy scene. Delilah looked at the poster with longing. It represented the view she wished she had. But Delilah didn't have an ocean view. She had a view of dumpsters and the filthy backside of the 24-hour diner where she worked. She didn't have serenity either. She had her annoying neighbor Mary, who continued to sing at the top of her lungs, "Thank you, thank you, thank you for starting my day." "Who sings about alarm clocks?" Delilah snapped, groaning and rubbing her eyes. It was bad enough having a singing neighbor. It was worse having a singing neighbor who started making up her own stupid songs and always started her day with one about an alarm clock. Weren't alarm clocks bad enough on their own? Speaking of which, Delilah looked at her clock. What? She catapulted from bed. Grabbing the little battery-powered digital clock, Delilah glared at its face, which read 6:25 a.m. "What good are you?" Delilah demanded, tossing the clock onto her bright blue comforter. Delilah had a pathological hatred of alarm clocks. It was a vestige of the 10 months she spent in her last foster home, nearly 5 years before, but life in the real world required the use of them, something Delilah was still learning to deal with. Though now she discovered something she hated worse than alarm clocks that didn't work. Delilah's phone rang. When she picked it up, she didn't wait for the caller to speak. Talking over the sound of clattering plates and a hum of voices, she said, "I know, Nate, I overslept. I can be there in 30 minutes. I already called in Rianne to cover. You can take her 2 o'clock shift." Delilah sighed. She hated that shift. It was the really busy one. Actually, she hated all the shifts. She hated shifts, period. As a shift manager at the diner, she was expected to work whichever shift best fit the overall schedule. So her days varied from 6 to 2, 2 to 10, and 10 to 6. Her body clock was so messed up that she was practically sleeping while she was awake, and awake while she was sleeping. She lived in a state of perpetual exhaustion. Her mind was always murky, like fog had rolled in through her ears. Not only did the fog dampen her ability to think clearly, it also made it difficult for her brain to interface with her senses. It seemed as though her vision, hearing, and taste buds were always a little off. "Delilah, can I count on you to be here at 2? Nate barked in Delilah's ear. Yes, I'll be there." Nate made a growling sound and hung up. "Love you too," Delilah said into the phone before she set it down. Delilah looked at her queen-size bed. The thick mattress and her special memory foam pillow beckoned like a languid lover, inviting her back to bed. Delilah so wanted to give in. She loved sleep. She loved just being in her bed. It was like a cocoon, an adult version of the blanket fort she'd liked to build when she was little. She would spend all day in her bed if she could. She wished she could find one of those stay-at-home jobs that let her work in her bed at her pajamas. It wouldn't be ideal for her employer because she'd rather just lounge about and sleep, but it would be better for her health. She could set her own shifts if she worked for herself. But all her searching for such a job had found nothing but work-at-home scams. The only place that would hire her after she and Richard split up was the diner. All because she had a juvie record and had dropped out of high school for reasons she barely remembered anymore. Life sucked. Delilah looked at her useless alarm clock. No, she couldn't risk it. She had to stay awake. But how? Next door, Mary was on another repeat of her stupid wake-up song. Delilah knew it would do no good to bang on the wall or go next door to ask Mary to keep it down. Mary wasn't cooking with all her burners. Delilah wasn't sure what was wrong with the woman. She just knew that her previous complaint had disappeared into the void that seemed to make up the mind hidden under Mary's thick gray hair. Delilah didn't want to stay in her apartment and listen to Mary. She might as well do something useful. Shuffling into her tiny pink-tiled bathroom, Delilah brushed her teeth and dressed in gray sweats and a red t-shirt. She figured she might as well go for a jog. It had been at least 3 days since she'd gotten exercise. Maybe that had something to do with the fog in her head. Nah, she knew that wasn't true. She'd tried exercise as a solution to her constant exhaustion. It didn't seem to matter how much she worked out. Her body just didn't like bouncing from one schedule to another like a hummingbird flitting about. It's just because it's winter, Delilah's best friend Harper said. When spring comes, you'll wake up, just like the flowers. Delilah had doubted that, and rightfully so. Spring was here. Everything was blooming, except Delilah's energy levels. But whether it would help her head or not, Delilah put on her running shoes and tucked her keys, phone, some money, driver's license, and a credit card into her running pouch, which she often hung around her neck. Leaving her little noisy apartment, Mary was still singing, Delilah stepped out into a carpeted hallway that smelled like bacon, coffee, and glue. What was with the glue? Delilah snorted as she trotted down 3 flights of narrow, uneven steps. Someone was probably fixing the wall or something. She wasn't exactly living in an upscale place. 2 sullen, slouchy teens ambled through the building's lobby as Delilah reached it. They eyed her. She ignored them, stepping through the scratched gray metal door just in time to watch the sun duck behind a fluffy white cloud. It was one of those bright, breezy spring days that Harper loved and Delilah hated. Maybe if she lived on the coast or in a forest, she could appreciate the happy sun and the sprightly air currents. Surrounded by nature and maybe some blossoming flowers, such a day would feel right. But here? Here in this urban conglomerate of strip malls, machine shops, car dealerships, vacant lots, and low-income housing, bright and breezy wasn't pleasant, it was jarring. A tiara would look more suitable on a pig. Trying to ignore smells of rotting lettuce, exhaust, and rancid frying oil, Delilah propped her foot on the side of an empty flower planter in front of her gray-walled, boxy building. Maybe it would feel more like spring if the planters were growing flowers instead of rocks. Delilah stretched, then shook her head at her negativity. You know better, she scolded herself. Setting off at a medium-paced jog, Delilah pointed herself north, which would take her through the nearest housing area, where she could run past houses and trees instead of struggling businesses and cars. She needed to get out of this dark spiral she was in. She'd seen enough therapy when she was in her teens to know that she had an obsessive personality. Once she latched onto a perspective, there was no unlatching her. Right now, she was stuck on the idea that her life sucked. It was going to continue to suck if she didn't pick a new idea. As her feet met the uneven sidewalk, Delilah tried to clear the fog from her brain by thinking happy thoughts. Every day I'm getting better and better, she chanted. After 10 rounds or so of this affirmation, she was starting to feel snarly. So she traded affirmations for an image of the life she wanted to be living. That made her think of the life she had been living with Richard, which just dropped her further into the negativity pit. When Richard decided he wanted to replace his dark-haired, dark-eyed missus with a blonde, blue-eyed wife, Delilah didn't have many options. She'd signed a prenuptial agreement before marrying Richard. She had nothing going into the marriage, and she got nothing in the divorce. Well, not nothing. She received enough of a settlement to get her an apartment, some second-hand furniture, and her 15-year-old tan compact sedan. She got those after she found the one place that was willing to hire her and train her. Given her stunning resume of completed half of 12th grade, babysat, and worked in a fast food restaurant, she was lucky to get what she got. And awful hours aside, the job had been good to her. Nate had sent her to management training, and she had climbed the ladder from server to shift manager in just a few months. At 23, she was the youngest shift manager in the restaurant. See, Delilah panted, things are looking up. She clung to that positive thought as she jogged through the ratty old neighborhood that backed onto an industrial park. The neighborhood was too run down to be called pretty, but it was filled with beautiful old maple trees and tall poplars that swayed in the gentle wind coming up the street. All the trees filled with light green new growth. The tender leaves encouraged more hopeful thoughts, if only for a minute or two. She wondered if the people who lived in the area ever let the trees inspire them. Looking around, she doubted it. A few listless kids were waiting for the yellow school buses that belched diesel fumes as they came chugging up behind Delilah. An old guy with a shiny bald head mowed a yard full of weeds, and a woman whose attitude appeared to be worse than Delilah's stood on her front porch glaring into a coffee mug. Delilah decided she'd had enough of the neighborhood, and enough of her run, for that matter. She looped around a defunct car parts store and aimed for home. Home. If only it was home. But her apartment wasn't home. She'd had 2 homes in her life. One she shared with her parents until they died when she was 11. The foster homes she lived in after that were nothing more than places to hide her time. Her other home was with Richard. Now she just had a place where she slept, and she never got to sleep enough. Lately it felt like life was just another annoying sleep interruption after another, like the world was an alarm that kept going off and waking her from her dreams, the only place where she could finally find a truly happy thought. Back in her apartment, Delilah did her best to ignore her mostly empty, pale green walls. She hadn't even gotten up the oomph to repaint since she'd moved in. She took off her shoes and put them neatly by the front door. She crossed to her well-worn beige leather love seat and straightened the green and yellow afghan draped over its back. Delilah didn't like the afghan, but Harper had crocheted it for her. One day Harper had dropped by and was crushed when she didn't see the afghan. After that, Delilah had left it out. Harper told Delilah when she presented the gift. Given that there were many such bits, proper tucking was challenging. Mary continued warbling next door, and Delilah peeled off her sweaty t-shirt and opened the cabinet where she kept her stash of cookies. The cabinet was empty. Of course. Sighing, Delilah opened her refrigerator. She knew that was a futile action because she didn't cook, and therefore kept nothing in the fridge but bottled water, apple juice, and half-eaten carry-out food from the diner. One of the perks of working at the diner was she got 2 free meals every shift. That kept her pretty well fed. So all she really needed were her cookies, milk, some protein bars, and frozen dinners for the nights she didn't work. The refrigerator revealed that she not only needed cookies, but milk too. Mary's voice wafted through the wall. "Spring has sprung and worms have come." "Yes, that's what I'm afraid of, Mary," Delilah said. She couldn't stay here. Striding into her small bathroom, Delilah took a lukewarm shower, then dressed in brown leggings and a gold and black plaid jacket. She avoided looking in the mirror while she dried her wavy, shoulder-length hair. Delilah didn't wear makeup anymore. Rather than spend money on cosmetics that got her unwanted male attention, she left her face bare and put the extra dollars in her savings account. Even without it, Delilah was pretty enough to turn heads. A modeling agency she applied to once told her she was just a large chin shy of having classically beautiful features. 2 agencies had given her the names of plastic surgeons and told her to come back after she'd had a little chin and jaw work done. Delilah figured if she wasn't going to put on makeup, why look in the mirror? She knew what she looked like, and lately she wasn't too keen on meeting her own gaze. She saw something there that scared her, something that made her wonder what her future held. Next door, Mary was singing at the top of her lungs about visiting Mars. "You go, Mary," Delilah said, wishing Mary would go to Mars, and never come back. Grabbing her purse, Delilah headed for the car. She figured she should get to the store, get some cookies and milk, and still come back in time to get a little nap before work. After a visit to the grocery store replenished her oatmeal cookie stash and her milk supply, Delilah left the store from the rear of the parking lot. She liked weaving her way back to the apartment on quiet neighborhood roads, instead of the congested 4 lanes that ran through the heart of the industrial and retail splat she lived in. This neighborhood was a little nicer than the one she ran through. If it had bigger houses, greener lawns, and newer cars, well, the trade-off was that the older neighborhood had those big maple and poplar trees, and this new neighborhood had runty cherry trees. She had to admit the pink blossoms were pretty, though. Turning the corner next to a particularly flowery tree, Delilah spotted a garage sale sign. Its arrow pointed straight ahead, so on a whim, she went that way. 2 more signs directed her to take right turns, and eventually she found herself in front of a 2-story Spanish-style home, looming over several card tables piled high with household merchandise. Delilah couldn't help herself. She had to stop. Just as she had a thing about getting stuck in a thought pattern, she had a thing about garage sales. She'd been hooked on them ever since she was a teen. One of her therapists, Allie, had a theory about it. Allie thought Delilah loved garage sales because they gave her glimpses into family life. They reminded her of what normal looked like. Delilah wasn't an obsessive garage sale shopper. Yes, she did occasionally buy. She'd gotten all her current furniture from garage sales. Mostly, though, Delilah was a garage sale watcher, an archaeologist of household items, a stuff private eye. She wanted to know what people used, what they collected, what they loved, and what they didn't want to keep around anymore. It entertained her. Figuring her milk could sit in the car for 15 minutes or so, Delilah pulled her car behind a dirty red pickup. The pickup and a powder blue Cadillac were the only cars parked in front of the house. Just 2 people wandered among the tables. One person was a heavy-set woman who seemed intent on kitchenware. The other was a slight young man who was browsing piles of books and records. Delilah nodded at the both of them, and also at the middle-aged woman who sat next to a picnic table that held a metal cash box, a pad of paper, and a calculator. "Welcome," the woman called out. She had short, spiky brown hair, and her eyes were encircled in heavy black eyeliner. She wore a yellow running suit, and she carried a butterscotch-colored chihuahua that was so quiet and docile, Delilah began to wonder whether it was real. But when she stepped up to pet it, the dog wagged its tail. "This is Mumford," the woman said. "Hello, Mumford." Delilah scratched Mumford behind the ears, becoming Mumford's new best friend. Strolling away from him and his human, Delilah explored the intriguing piles on each table. She poked through small appliances, tools, games, puzzles, electronics, and clothes, finding a black leather jacket that intrigued her until she sniffed it and got a nose of stale mothballs. Wandering to the next table, she found herself in the toy section. A glance at a pile of fashion dolls darkened her already precarious mood, because the dolls reminded her of how impossible it was to prevent other foster kids from playing with her stuff when she was growing up. Blocks made her think of a little foster brother she'd gotten close to in her foster home number 3, only to lose him to adoption. She was getting ready to walk away from the table, in search of home decor items, when her gaze landed on a different doll. With curly brown hair, big dark eyes, and plump pink cheeks, the doll looked almost exactly like the baby Delilah had envisioned having someday with Richard. At the start of their marriage, her baby was as real to her as anything in the physical world. She'd been sure she was going to be a mother, so sure that she named the baby before the baby was even conceived. Her name would be Emma. Intrigued, Delilah circled the table to get closer to the doll. Tucked in a large wooden box full of plush toys and electronic gadgets, the pretty baby's face was partially shadowed by the doll's blue hat. The hat's wide brim, fringed in pink ruffles, looked weird, wedged between a game console and what looked like a remote-control airplane. Delilah had to shift both items to free the doll, which was about 2 feet tall. Wearing a puffy-sleeved 1980s-era bright blue full-skirted dress with pink ruffled trim and a big bow around the waist, the doll was much heavier than Delilah expected her to be. When she examined her, Delilah realized this was because the doll was electronic. She reached for the bright pink tag and instruction booklet that hung from the doll's wrist. "My name is Ella," the tag read. Ella. So close to Emma. Delilah felt an odd tingle slither through her body. How weird was that? A doll that looked like her long-desired baby, and a name that was far too close to be a coincidence. Although it had to be a coincidence, didn't it? Delilah opened the little booklet. Her eyes widened. Wow, this was a high-tech doll. According to the booklet, Ella was a helper doll manufactured by Fazbear Entertainment. Fazbear Entertainment, Delilah whispered. She'd never heard of it. The booklet was a list of what Ella was designed for, and the list was impressive. Ella could do all sorts of things. She could keep time and serve as an alarm clock, manage appointments, keep track of lists, take photos, read stories, sing songs, and even serve drinks. Serve drinks? Ella shook her head. Looking around, Delilah was relieved to see that no one was paying attention to her interest in the doll. Mumford's mom was helping the young man looking at records. The heavy-set woman was busy piling china plates next to the metal cash box. No one else had shown up. Delilah kept reading. Ella, the booklet said, could test the pH levels in water, and she could also do the personality assessments when you answered her programmed list of 200 questions. How is it possible for an old toy to be that sophisticated? Both Ella's design and that of her booklet suggested that her clothing matched her year of manufacture. She was not new, not even close. Did she really do all of these things? Delilah turned Ella over, and she found a note printed to Ella's dress. The note explained that only one of Ella's functions that worked was the alarm clock. Delilah flipped Ella again, and she saw that Ella had a small digital clock embedded in her chest. Concentrating on following the instructions, Delilah attempted to activate the alarm clock feature by pressing a sequence of little buttons found on Ella's round belly. Delilah nearly dropped poor Ella when the last button she pushed made Ella's eyes bolt open. She sucked in her breath at the snapping sound, and her heartbeat quadrupled in a nanosecond when Ella went from asleep to awake in an instant. Delilah held Ella out in front of her. Well, she did need an alarm clock. She checked the little white price tag stuck to the back of Ella's neck. Not too bad. Delilah could handle that, and maybe she could get the price down. Her hundreds of garage sale visits had turned her into a pretty good haggler. Delilah picked up Ella and headed toward Mumford and his mom, who were both back behind the cash box. The young man was loading a box of records into his pickup. "Will you shave $15 off this price?" Delilah asked, "since she only has one function?" The woman held out a hand with bright red fingernails. She turned Ella over, looked at the price, then looked up at Delilah, who tried to look eager and poor at the same time. "Okay, sure, I can do that." Delilah grinned. "Great." As she paid, she instructed herself to notice that her day did indeed get better as it went along. It didn't suck to have a nice run, buy more cookies, and find a very cool high-tech doll for a good price at a garage sale. Ella would make a pretty cool conversation piece to perch on Delilah's old oak coffee table. Harper was going to love Ella. And now Delilah had a working alarm clock. She could go home, take a nap, and still have a way to be sure she got up in time for work. Yep, things were looking up. Maybe she could get off the life sucks track after all. Back in her apartment, Delilah set Ella on her nightstand, under her white ginger jar lamp. Ella, with her poofy dress all fluffed up and spread out around her, looked good there, content even. Actually, she looked a little pleased with herself, which was, of course, a projection, because Ella wasn't even aware of herself. It was Delilah who was pleased with herself. She was proud for finding a way to turn the day around. She'd gotten past her funk. That was pretty impressive. Delilah checked her watch and set Ella's clock to match that time. It was barely 11:30 a.m., so Delilah was going to be able to grab a couple hours of sleep. Setting Ella's alarm for 1:35 p.m., Delilah smoothed her sheets and blanket and lay down on top of them, pulling up the comforter to her chin, not because it was cold in her apartment, but because it was made to feel her secure. Thankful that Mary was either asleep herself, was out running errands, or had ruined her vocal cords with too much singing, Delilah lay back and let herself ride the currents of drowsiness into blissful unconsciousness. The phone blasted through Delilah's peace like a rocket shattering monastery walls. She shot upright and grabbed for her phone, chastising herself for not shutting it off so her nap wouldn't be interrupted. "What?" she snarled. "Where the hell are you?" Nate snarled right back. "Huh? It's—" Delilah looked at Ella. Ella's clock read 2:25 p.m. "Oh, crap. You better be here in 15 minutes or you don't ever be here again." Delilah pulled the phone from her ear just in time to avoid the clap she knew was coming. Nate used an old-fashioned corded phone, the kind with the metal hook for the receiver. He expressed himself via the force from which he replaced the phone on its hook after a call. He was pissed. Delilah ran into her bathroom, tearing off her clothes as she went. She splashed water on her face. Running a brush through her hair, she trotted back into the bedroom, yanked on her dark blue uniform dress, and grabbed her work shoes, ugly black no-slips Nate made all the employees wear. As she laced them up, her gaze landed on Ella. "Well, you're a disappointment," she said. She told the doll. Ella looked back at her through thick lashes. One of her curls had fallen over an eye. She almost looked mischievous. No wonder the doll was so cheap. The only thing that worked was the clock in the middle of Ella's chest. But without the alarm function, what good was the clock? Ella was still a pretty doll, and she still looked like Delilah's long-desired baby, but now she was more a reminder of Delilah's frustration than anything else. Finishing her with her shoes, Delilah snatched Ella from the nightstand. For a second, she marveled at the realism of Ella's baby-soft skin. But then she strode into the living room, grabbed her purse, and headed out the door. Jogging down the hall to the stairs, Delilah shook her head when she heard Mary belt out, "I love the big bright world!" Outside, the sun had seeded the sky to a ceiling of low-hanging clouds spitting fat raindrops. Delilah paused to hold the door open for two elderly ladies, who took an excruciatingly long time to go inside. Then she tore around the side of the building, heading for the dumpsters. 3 green hulking dumpsters sat like a trio of trolls at the edge of the apartment building's parking lot. 2 were open and 1 was closed. Delilah aimed toward the second open dumpster, and she swung Ella in an arc, releasing Ella's hand at the apex of the curve. Ella flew through the intermittent precipitation and landed with a reverberating metallic thud in one of the open dumpsters. Delilah winced a little at the sound, feeling guilty for tossing out a doll that looked just like her baby, a doll with surprisingly real-feeling hands. Delilah didn't see which dumpster Ella landed in because Nate appeared at the diner's back doorway. Delilah waved at him. "You late because you were out playing with your dolly?" he called out. "Very funny." Delilah ran toward the diner and reached the door just as the raindrops turned into rain sheets. Nate stepped back to let her by, then closed the door on what was now a downpour. Delilah got a whiff of Nate's aftershave. "Manly, don't you think?" he asked the first time he tried the new product. Delilah had to admit it was. Defying the stereotype of the typical diner owner, Nate was tall, fit, good-looking, and well-groomed. About 50, he had short graying black hair and a tidy, close-trimmed beard. He also had gray eyes that could impale you with his displeasure. He was aiming those eyes at Delilah now. "You're lucky you're good and the customers love you," he said. "But you need to get a handle on your tardiness. I can't let you slide forever." I know, I'm trying." "That you are." Delilah's shift went quickly. That was the upside of working the 2 to 10. The rush could kick your butt, but at least time flew by. Delilah got back to her apartment at about 10:30 p.m., thankfully missing one of Mary's goodnight songs. The building was pretty quiet. All Delilah could hear was rap music coming from one of the apartments at the end of the hall, and the sound of laughter coming from a TV on the floor above. Closing her door on what smelled like burned Brussels sprouts, Delilah hoped the noxious odor wouldn't follow her, and it didn't. Her apartment smelled like pine cleaner and oranges. It smelled better than Delilah, who smelled like grease, as she always did at the end of a shift. Peeling off her clothes, she deposited them inside the cedar chest that sat by her door. The chest, combined with the charcoal air-purifying bag tucked inside of it, solved the grease smell problem she'd had for weeks when she first got the diner job. In the shower, Delilah washed off the rest of the grease smell. Then she pulled on a red, long-sleeved nightshirt and settled in bed with half a container of beef stroganoff and green beans. The cook who worked the 2 to 10 shift was the best one Nate had. The stroganoff was great. While she ate, Delilah watched the rerun of a comedy show on the old TV sitting on top of her antique maple dresser. The show didn't make her laugh. It didn't even make her smile. It just helped her feel less lonely while she ate. As the characters in the show cracked jokes and put staplers in Jell-O, Delilah started to feel drowsy. About 11:30 p.m., Delilah set her empty styrofoam container atop a pile of home decor magazines on her nightstand. She turned off her ginger lamp and curled up on her side. The streetlights that hovered over the parking lot outside cast sinister, distorted shadows throughout her room. They looked like giant, bony fingers reaching toward the bed. Delilah closed her eyes and willed sleep to come quickly, which it did. It ended just as quickly. Delilah's eyes shot open. Her non-alarm clock's lit face told her it was 1:35 a.m. She sat up and looked around. What woke her up? Her alarm clock wasn't working. Looking toward her window, she rubbed her eyes. It had been a sound, some kind of intrusive sound coming from outside her window. Had it been a ringing sound? A buzzing sound? Delilah tilted her head, listening. She could hear nothing but the whoosh of cars on the road. She looked back at the clock. It was now 1:36 a.m. Wait, she'd woken up at 1:35 a.m. She'd set the doll's alarm for 1:35. What if she'd missed the AM/PM settings? "Oops," she whispered. "Sorry, Ella." Delilah thought about going outside to retrieve the possibly still working doll, but she was too tired. She'd look in the morning. Delilah snuggled under the covers and went back to sleep. "You threw it away?" Harper drew in her chin, raised an eyebrow, and quirked her mouth in her "what were you thinking" expression. "I thought it was broken." "Yeah, but it could be a collectible. It could be worth something." Harper's huge blue eyes lit up at the idea of dollar signs. Delilah could almost see a calculator totaling imaginary amounts in Harper's mind. Delilah and Harper sat at an elevated round table in Harper's favorite espresso place. Delilah sipped cinnamon tea. Harper was drinking some kind of fancy quadruple espresso. Harper was addicted to coffee. The espresso place was a brick-walled, narrow space with lots of stainless steel and chrome, and very little wood. At just before 11 a.m., it wasn't very crowded. A dark-skinned woman with pigtails sat at one table concentrating on whatever was on her laptop, and an elderly man munched on a muffin while reading the paper. Behind the counter, machines fizzed and spit. Haven't I taught you anything? Harper asked. Always try to sell it before you toss it, remember? I was late for work. I was a little stressed. You need to learn to meditate. Then I'd miss work because I got lost in meditation. Harper laughed, and everyone in the place turned to look at her. Harper's laugh was like a resounding sea lion bark. You could tell how funny she thought something was by the number of barks. Delilah's comment only warranted one. How do you like the new play? Delilah asked. It's yippee-skippy fun. My lines are all crap, but I love my character. Delilah smiled. Harper had been Delilah's best friend for almost 6 years, ever since the two of them landed in foster care together. Determined that the foster home would be their last, they'd teamed up to help each other survive the regimented structure imposed by Gerald, the ex-military husband of the couple who'd taken them in. Whenever Gerald admonished them for not adhering to his schedule, reminding them that this had to happen at 5 and that had to happen at 6:10, Harper would mumble something like, and you can jump off a cliff at oh screw you 100. She made Delilah laugh, which helped her survive. Complete opposites in both looks and personality, Harper and Delilah probably would never have been friends if they hadn't been thrown into scheduling hell together. However, they made their friendship work. When Harper announced her mischievous plan for getting a famous playwright to cast her in his plays, Delilah just said, be safe. When Delilah said she was going to marry her knight in shining armor and have babies, Harper just said, don't sign a prenup. Harper followed Delilah's advice and had the grace not to say, I told you so, when Delilah failed to follow hers. I think you should look for her, Harper said. What? Ella, I think you should look for her. Harper toyed with one of the dozen or so blonde braids she had on her head. Wearing heavy, colorful makeup and a skin-tight green dress, she had an exotic Medusa look going on. Because she might be worth something, Delilah nodded. It's not just that. You said she looked like the baby you thought you were going to have. That's a pretty bizarre thing, don't you think? That you'd find a doll that looks like the imaginary baby? What if she's some kind of sign? You know I don't believe in signs. Maybe you should. Delilah shrugged, and they spent the rest of their visit talking about Harper's play and Harper's latest boyfriend. They then reminded each other, as they always did, of the hell they'd escaped. No, you cannot use the bathroom, not until 9:45. That's your scheduled time to urinate, Harper intoned. She did great impersonations, and she had Gerald nailed. She could also eerily mimic the alarm Gerald had used to signal every scheduled event in the household. The alarm was a sort of cross between a ring, a buzz, and a siren. Delilah always covered her ears when Harper felt compelled to impersonate it. Richard had once asked Delilah why she and Harper needed to relive their past regularly. She said, it reminds us of how good things are now, even when they don't seem so good. Anything is better than living with Gerald. As it always did, when Delilah and Harper were together, time disappeared. When Delilah went out to her car, she realized she barely had time to get home and get changed before her shift. Why are you being so nice to me? Delilah asked Nate when she arrived for her 2 to 10. She stood in front of the schedule posted on the bulletin board in the employee break room. Nate had scheduled Delilah for the 2 to 10 shift for a full week in a row. She couldn't remember the last time she'd worked the same shift for a week, and this shift was especially good right now because as long as she went to bed within a couple hours after ending her shift, she'd wake up with plenty of time for work. She wouldn't even need an alarm clock. She could put up with the evening rush in exchange for decent sleep. Nate looked up from doing his daily paperwork at the round table by the bulletin board. It's in my best interests. I like it when you show up on time for work. Well, it's easier to show up on time to work when my body can figure out what time it is, Delilah said. Wuss. Slave driver. Whiner. Meanie. Delilah started her shift as close to happy as she'd been in some time. Work was going well. When Nate teased, Nate was happy. When Nate was happy, things ran smoothly. Delilah had such a good time at work that she came back to the apartment in a good mood. She ate meatloaf and broccoli in a good mood, and she went to sleep in a good mood. The good mood disappeared, though, when she sat up in bed, her muscles rigid, listening. Who was whispering? Someone was whispering. Delilah could hear indecipherable, sibilant words coming from where? Wide awake, she looked at her clock. It was 1:35 a.m. Seriously? Again? Delilah strained to understand the whispers, but they stopped. Now all she could hear were cars on the road. Where did that whispering come from? Ella, it had to be. Harper was right. Delilah should have looked for Ella. She should have checked, not because Ella might have been valuable or because she was a sign, but because apparently her alarm was still going off at 1:35 a.m. But Delilah hadn't had time before she went to work. She'd check today for sure. She couldn't believe Ella's alarm was so powerful she could hear it from here. But then again, wasn't Mary singing enough painful proof of the apartment's thin walls? Delilah laid back down and closed her eyes. Ella's face filled her inner vision. Delilah opened her eyes. She sat up again. I'm not going to get any sleep unless I find her, she thought. Delilah got up and put on sweats. Stuffing her feet in a pair of slip-on clogs, she reached in her nightstand drawer for a flashlight. The dumpsters were well lit, but if Ella was partially buried, Delilah might have trouble spotting her. Throwing on an ugly multicolored cardigan Harper had crocheted for her, Delilah left her apartment, went down the silent hallway and stairs, and exited the building. Outside, the air was chilly, but the sky was clear. A few stars even managed to shine through the frothy glow of the urban night. Delilah paused just outside the building and looked around to be sure she was alone. She was. Padding around the building, she headed for the dumpsters. The yawning green trash bin sat ugly and under the spotlight to the street lamps in the diner's floodlights. One of the two that had been open before was closed, and the one that had been closed was open. They all looked a little askew, like they'd been moved around. Great. If they'd been moved, finding Ella would be like playing a game of hat trick. This might take longer than Delilah had envisioned. Glancing around again, Delilah shrugged. She might as well get it over with. Approaching the middle dumpster, the one she thought she'd thrown Ella into, Delilah lifted the lid, stood on her tiptoes, and shone the light down inside. The light landed on a mound of plastic garbage bags, a ratty old blanket, a smattering of takeout containers, and a sprinkling of empty cans. Her light didn't reveal the obnoxious smell of dirty diapers that Delilah's nose discovered as soon as she opened the lid. Delilah gently closed the lid, careful not to let it clang shut. If Ella was in this dumpster, she was buried. Delilah decided she'd rather check the other two dumpsters first before diving into any of them. So she did her tiptoe light aiming routine first at the open one that she thought had also been open when she chucked Ella into a dumpster. The only thing that set this dumpster apart from the first one Delilah looked at was a couple dozen old paperbacks cascading over the piles of stuffed garbage bags. Delilah was tempted to take one of them, a murder mystery, but it had a suspicious red stain on it. She didn't want to know what the stain was. The last dumpster Delilah checked in was the one she was pretty sure had been closed when she'd tossed away Ella. So she wasn't surprised to find more of the same kind of trash and no sign of Ella. Stymied, Delilah turned off her flashlight and thought for a moment. Did she really have to get in these dumpsters and dig for Ella? She didn't know for sure that it was Ella waking her up. For all she knew, it was Mary singing some dumb middle-of-the-night song or a cat in heat. Yeah, but why did she get awakened precisely at 1:35 a.m. both last night and tonight? Coincidence? It was possible, wasn't it? Harper once went through this period where she kept waking up at 3:33 a.m., and then she saw 333 everywhere for a couple months. Harper researched the number and found out it was some kind of spiritual sign. What if 135 was a spiritual sign just for Delilah? She snorted and turned her back on the dumpsters. Now she was just being silly. She headed back to the front of the building. She'd stick with the coincidence theory for now. It was easier and less smelly than assuming Ella was the problem. The coincidence explanation got strained when Delilah awoke at 1:35 a.m. for the third night in a row. This time she was sure there had been a sound against her window. Had it been a scratching sound? A tapping? Whatever it was, it had been ominous enough that Delilah immediately grabbed her flashlight and aimed it at her blinds. Then, after staring at her unmoving blinds for a minute, she got up the courage to tiptoe across the room and look behind them. Nothing was at the window. And down below in the parking lot, the dumpsters hadn't moved from the positions they'd been in the night before. Delilah blew out air. She was going to have to search every one of those dumpsters. Should she wait for daylight? That would make it easier, wouldn't it? And if someone asked what she was doing, she'd answer truthfully that she just threw something out that she shouldn't have thrown out. Delilah left the window and took a step toward her bed. She stopped. What day was it? Working all sorts of weird shifts, Delilah rarely knew what day of the week it was. She thought for a second. Wednesday. Well, crap, she grumbled. The dumpsters were emptied on Thursday mornings early. If she waited, Ella would be gone. But wait, that was a good thing, right? If Ella was gone, her alarm wouldn't go off and wake up Delilah. Delilah didn't think Ella was worth anything, and she was sure Ella's resemblance to Emma was a fluke. There was no reason why Delilah should have to climb through stinky trash. She could just let the garbage truck take her problem away. Delilah smiled and got back to bed. Thursday night, or rather Friday early morning, Delilah's eyes opened to see 1:35 a.m. again. She was immediately fully alert. As soon as she woke, Delilah had a strange, disturbingly strong feeling that something was under her bed. Something was moving under her bed. But that couldn't be, could it? Delilah listened. She didn't hear anything at first, but then she wondered if she was hearing a scuttling sound on the carpet under her bed. She sat up and started to swing a leg over the side of the bed. She stopped. What if something was under there? It could grab her foot. Quickly pulling her foot back under the covers, Delilah reached out and turned on her nightstand lamp. As soon as the room was lit, she leaned over and checked the floor all around her bed. She saw nothing but the tan and cream-colored carpet she'd gotten at a yard sale. She'd just imagined the sound. Or something was still under her bed. Delilah reached for her nightstand drawer. She grabbed her flashlight, turned it on, took a deep breath, then hung over her bed and shined the light beneath it. Nothing was there. Okay, this was getting crazy. It was 4 nights in a row. It had to be Ella. But the dumpsters had been emptied. Delilah crossed her legs and rubbed her arms. They were covered with goosebumps. What if the trash collectors didn't completely empty the dumpsters? Or what if Ella fell out as the bin was being emptied? Delilah had to check, and she had to check now. She needed to know. So, repeating her steps from 2 nights before, Delilah went out to the dumpsters with her flashlight. Tonight, they were all closed. They usually were after trash pickup on Thursdays. Delilah approached the dumpsters in order, from right to left. She lifted 3 lids and shined her light into 3 nearly empty bins. All she found were 2 bags of household trash, a bag of dirty diapers, and its corresponding nasty odor, a broken lamp, and a sad pile of old men's clothing. The only thing that could have hidden Ella was the pile of clothing, so Delilah, holding her breath, hung over the edge of the dumpster that had the clothing, and used her flashlight to poke around in the pile. The only thing under the clothes was more clothes. Delilah picked her way between the dumpsters and around the area surrounding them. She shined her flashlight into every dark nook or cranny she spotted. No Ella. The doll was gone, for sure. She wasn't here. She couldn't be what was waking Delilah up at 1:35 a.m. So what was?